Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we have cardboard consensus alongside discussing playoffs, everything that's happened in the last week. In this episode, you have me, Scott, Ty, Jeff, and Phil. That's the order from like left to right, top to bottom. That's where we're at. Chris, we love you. We miss you. Hope you're doing good. They'll be back next week. So with that being said, let's discuss the playoffs. So playoffs, we have the NLCS and the ALCS happening right now. As of this moment, it is a split series between the Dodgers and the Mets, and the Yankees are currently up right now against the Guardians. We're not spoiling anything for anybody because this is a Monday night recording. But what are your takeaways from the postseason, and how can we correlate that to baseball cards? What are you impressed with? Anybody you are impressed with, or anybody whose cards may be able to go up based off of their positioning and maybe a World Series title? Let's start with you, Jeff. What are you thinking?
All right, that's a lot of questions to get to. I guess my biggest takeaway at this point of the playoffs was that the Padres-Dodgers series and Game 5 was huge because both teams have a lot of hobby-relevant players on, and it would have been interesting to see what happened to, say, Ohtani cards and Betts cards if the Dodgers got eliminated early. And conversely, one of the hottest players in the playoffs, Fernando Tatis, who's just been hitting bombs left and right, how his cards could have seen some kind of rebound. He and Machado are very hobby relevant. So that was a big game for me to see who would advance. And now that the Dodgers were the team to advance, Ohtani's been a little rough lately. I think at one point today with nobody on base, he was 0 for 20, 0 for 19 or 0 for 20. Players on base, he's still hitting great, but there weren't as many opportunities in the past few games as there were at the last weeks of the regular season. But Betts is starting to warm up a little bit, so maybe we can get a little change of narrative there for Mookie and his postseason career. So I'm watching that closely, more so than the American League playoffs right now.
Cool. I will say I actually just did a video that's released Tuesday, but I'm looking at players whose values went up over the last 10 months because I actually had a bunch of data from a previous video I made. So I just had like the top 30 players in Major League Baseball. And it's interesting to see how much these players' values were impacted. Like Tatis is already going up, which is good. So it's already helped Tatis. But surprisingly, Manny Machado has lost more value in the last 12 months than almost like anybody else. He's down like 30% on his Bowman Chrome autographs. So that slow start killed him. And unfortunately, I don't think he did much in the postseason. He had a couple of flyouts right to the wall that would have been home runs in other parks that would have won it for the Padres. But unfortunately, they got caught. So it's interesting. We can look at that later if it's relevant. But I'm worried about Machado. I actually think this postseason is good for Tatis because he was so good. I think he could have some hype heading into next year. I think we could see some good sales heading into the season.
He could, but to the Machado point quickly, he really turned it around the last few months and ended up having a great season. He seemed more healthy. That elbow is finally not bothering him, I guess. So I look for him to bounce back in a big way again next year. If he can get off to a non-slow start, that might actually help his cards.
Every player who's down big, like a Machado, all had a bad first half. So like Julio, like all those players, Jordan, if they started slow, no matter how they finished, they're still down, which is interesting to see. So
just Corbin Carroll's the same way.
Yeah,
Corbin Carroll just went down, and then was like the 5th best player in baseball after the All-Star break and didn't rebound. Like he barely came back. It was crazy.
So it just shows second half players that we saw it with Soto for the first few years of his career. Now Soto, but he had a hard time making big moves at times because of that. So
yeah, but I feel like he did spike, but maybe that was during like a different era in the card market too, like where there was just more reactionary behavior. But I don't know.
All right, Phil, what did you like about the postseason so far?
Well, if I was betting on these games, I probably would have lost quite a bit. I probably would have had the Phillies to advance. I would have had the Padres to advance, and a couple of the AL Central teams got bounced down, but I didn't expect them. Sorry, Ty, to get as far as they did, the Tigers and the Royals. So I've found the National League games to be quite a bit more exciting as a sort of, usually I'm an American League type guy, Red Sox fan, I guess, Yankee hater. I'm trying to think, like, what would the hobby prefer? Obviously Yankees versus Dodgers. But would the hobby hate a Yankees versus Mets? Because that would be interesting. We saw that 24 years ago, and that was pretty one-sided the way that went. But I don't know. Some of these like American League games, the Guardians look interesting and they look kind of special to me from like a non-hobby standpoint. The Yankees just can't string together hits, it seems.
They can't.
And their pitching's been pretty good, especially the bullpen. And that sort of kind of held them in it. Like the Royals did nothing against them. And Vinny Pasquantino allegedly was healthy. They had Salvador Perez, Witt. They had like their full offensive team, I feel like. And they just looked miserable. Bobby Witt's timing was way off. So that's a guy to look at in the offseason. Are people going to be worried about a slump? Can he follow up a 9.5 WAR season based on like Baseball Reference? Can he do that based on what we saw in sometimes perception's reality? So will people expect him to repeat based on what he showed in that, those final games?
Similar to Gunnar. I mean, he and Witt kind of had similar seasons, and then
Gunnar had 7 at-bats, so it's tough. He went 0 for 7. But like Witt, he had 2 game-winning RBIs in the wild card round, but then he went 1 for 15, 1 for 16 in the ALDS, which sucks. So
Witt was 5 for 26. He was 5 for 26, 192 average.
Yeah, I think with Tatis, we probably should have given him a little bit more credit in the last playoff episode. Granted, that was before one of his big hits, but this is a reminder of how good Tatis is and how he can take over, if not the hobby, he can take over real-life baseball for a number of weeks. And I think that in itself should bode well for his values in the short term. Long term, I don't know. Obviously, there's some serious doubt there. But, man, that guy, when he's on, he can just do so much. He's special.
He is good. And if he can get his defense back to where it was 2 years ago, where he's a Platinum Glove winner, plus if he hits like a good offensive stride, he could put up a 10 WAR season. He really could.
Or even halfway in between defense, he would.
Yeah, halfway in between. That's exactly right, Jeff. But yeah, so I think those are good ones to discuss. I think it is also interesting how many superstars just in general have been bad. Like there's hardly any superstars that have been really impact players. We can look at Bobby Witt wasn't great. Gunnar wasn't great. Adley wasn't great. Mookie hadn't been great. He's been better. Ohtani hasn't been spectacular. Judge has been putrid up to this point. It's just interesting. And it's all about, do you think this is a players can't handle the spotlight, or do you think it's just unfortunate slumps and unfortunate times?
I don't know. It's baseball, as we've talked about, and Phil's mentioned this too, how compared to other sports, how little effect a single player can have. But I'm thinking about like my Brewers, and their youngest player had a really good postseason. Churio had a really good postseason, so I felt like he stepped up. Yeah. And then Ty, like Skubal, had a great postseason. But again, it's tough for one player to affect an entire series.
I actually do think it's the opposite of the regular season and playoffs, in that one player can massively impact playoffs. Because
maybe, but why didn't the Tigers win then with two Skubal starts?
Well, right, because he gave up a grand slam, which sucked. So, I mean, they would have. And he basically, not to go on a Skubal rant, but he basically lost one pitch in that game. He lost control of one pitch that was supposed to be up in the zone, painted on the top, fastball, and he left it right over the middle, and Thomas just tattooed it. And it cost us the series, among other things. But, when you look at playoff stats, batting averages, all the batting stats for players in the playoffs, just holistically, they're all lower than they are regular season. You're facing better pitching. Usually you're bringing in relief pitchers in more moments. It's win at all costs. So in that regard,
good point.
If the average scoring to win a baseball game, you guys probably know what is it, like 4.3 runs or something like that to win a game in baseball during the regular season, it's probably like 3.3 runs in playoffs or something. It's lower typically. So when you have a player go off, like Tatis was doing, like Churio, like others,
Bryce Harper,
it can really impact at least a series, maybe not your whole playoff run, but it can impact a series. Or when you have a Madison Bumgarner who's just untouchable all of playoffs, then it can carry your team significantly in those, types of moments. But like, it's such a small sample size. You won't find a player on earth in baseball who in a season doesn't have a 2-week stretch where they just suck. Like it's just so rare. Ohtani might've been the exception this year to that. Like, I feel like I looked at his stats and just like week over week, he was incredibly consistent. but like that's very rare.
The only other one I can think of, Ty, is Witt. Witt was that same way. Anyways, sorry.
But then he ultimately hit that wall in the playoffs, and that's it. It does make you wonder if the big moments and the pressure don't get into the head game for some people, for some athletes, and they just can't handle the big spotlight and all the pressure. Stephen Kwan was an absolute freaking thorn in our side in that matchup with the Guardians, and he managed 3 hits in game 5 that were just fluky, weird squibbler hits and things that shouldn't have been hits, and got on base and then ultimately scored a bunch of times. So I don't know. Playoffs are really interesting. We talked about this from a card perspective. It's like Lane Thomas's cards are up now. Like they're up short term. His 2019 PSA 10 gold Topps Chrome refractor rookie auto, sold for $150 a month ago. His base Topps Chrome refractor PSA 10 now is sold 4 copies for $100 in the last 2 days. So like things just shift when these players get hot and people go, I got to have one of their, cards. I love this. Guardians fans, whomever, they want to get those. So I don't know. It's really fluky. Kyle, what is it? Higashioka for the Padres was like tearing it up. He was like helping carry them, through the playoffs, but it's kind of interesting. I'll ask you guys a quick trivia question. Do you know which hitter right now, which batter in baseball in the playoffs, still in the playoffs, now leads the playoffs in slugging percentage?
Mark Vientos.
Good guess. He's down at 14th of all playoff players. He's the 4th highest right now, still left in the playoffs.
It can't be Kike Hernandez.
It's not.
Yeah, because he had a bad game today.
No.
Who's had multiple home runs?
Stanton?
It is Stanton. Giancarlo Stanton.
Good one, Phil.
So I mean, for all the hatred toward him and just the contract and, the inability to move and runs like a statue in the mud and whatever, like he actually has 2 doubles and a home run and a 444 on base percentage, 688 slugging in the playoffs so far. So
I will say, Ty, on Stanton's case, so on Twitter, he is beloved for being postseason Stanton. They're all comparing him to Judge, how they switched, basically, how Stanton became Judge and Judge became Stanton in the postseason.
Right.
I think that could impact his legacy. If he can have a big postseason this year and win a championship, I think it'll matter. Who knows?
I mean, I think that's why these teams string together these guys who are capable of it. Like if you look at rosters that have been successful in recent years, World Series caliber rosters, look at the Phillies, look at other teams. We talk about Kyle Schwarber, we talk about Nick Castellanos, these guys who maybe they just go on these stretches where they hit sub Mendoza and they can't do anything, but like get into the playoffs. And if your batting lineup is stacked 1 to 9 with guys who are capable of 30, 40 home run power, it's scary. It's just like it's not about even stringing together runs at that point. It's just, you hit a home run and a guy just walked in front of you, and that could be the difference. And that's, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. To argue against something that Teapot said a few minutes ago, a guy can make an impact because offense is down, because it's we're dealing with small sample sizes, because a 3-run homer could mean a lot, but it's hard to pick which guy that will. Is it going to be Lane Thomas or J-Rod?
Right.
Is it going to be Mark Vientos or is it going to be Pete Alonso this time?
Yeah.
So I think that's more of the issue. Like a guy isn't predestined to do those things. You can't expect any one player to do those things. One guy might do it, but it's hard to pick which guy. Mm-hmm. I think, do you guys have any opinion on the expanded playoff format? And maybe it's less of an issue this time versus
that
like
it sucks.
Yeah. A Rangers D-backs World Series matchup. Like if you get, I'm not saying those teams are bad or were bad, but they didn't really look that great this year. And their teams changed, but how much did they change? The Rangers dealt with a lot of injuries, actually. But what I'm trying to say is, like, do you think because of the expanded playoff format, allowing potentially teams that wouldn't get to like the ALCS, NLCS round and further, do you think that's like hurting credibility of like, does the champion even matter when it's perhaps not even the best team a lot of times now?
Yes,
I'm not saying that can happen all the time, but there could.
Well, if the Mets win, Phil, they'll be the 3rd year in a row that a 6 seed makes the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Or makes the World Series. Sorry, which is just insane. The Phillies seemed like the best team during the regular season. They win 98 games and then they crap the bed in the playoffs. Yeah, the whole playoff system really sucks as it is. I know they're trying to bow to the owners to get money and the players, but it's got to change. And I'd really like, despite the NBA having so many teams make the playoffs, at least they have the right idea with the bottom teams, 7 through 10, having to just play in to get in. If you want to be in the playoffs, finish better than that, but play in to get in. And that's what baseball should do if they're going to have as many teams.
That's what the wild card. That's what the wild card was, right? Yeah. But the issue we run into is they will never make the playoffs the way that you would like it to, Jeff.
Well, they'll never make it smaller. So just
you never will. It's going to get bigger. I would not be surprised in the next CBA if there's another 2 teams added, 1 from each. Or they're going to do something.
What they should do is absolutely reduce the regular season. Then
they probably
regular season and make the playoffs longer so that the series are longer. So there's more.
The DS series should be 7 games. That'd have been great for the Padres Dodgers.
Yeah,
as an example.
Exactly. And the Brewers. I mean, I harped on this before they even lost, but the fact that you're set up to win your division, the goal of the league, the way it's set up is to win your division, and your reward is after 162 games is a 3-game series, and your reward is to have it at home. Well, that really sucks. It just shouldn't. You should get more than 3 games.
Yeah, there were a lot of games.
One more thing. As a Rockies fan, I like this format because we never won a division and we'd never be in the playoffs. We'd never have no chance to make the playoffs without this format. So it keeps more baseball fans interested in going to games and doing all this stuff in the season. It makes them so much more money even outside of the playoffs. So that's why I like it as a team, a fan of a team that's just horrible. Like the Tigers, Ty, it was fun for you this year. You paid attention the entire year because they had the chance to make the playoffs. If that wouldn't have been the case, Ty would not have cared past July, most likely. So that's my argument for it, to be fully transparent.
By the way, I just ran some quick stats just from my numbers were pretty close, honestly. So playoffs so far, I looked at total runs and total games played in the playoffs, and it comes out to 3.59 runs per game on average per team. And for the regular season, it was 4.39. So, and it's a small sample. That's just this year, 2024. And it's a small sample size, but I think that's generally like that. So the point being there, aside from like the heroics that are capable for one player, and Phil's absolutely right. You never know who it's going to be. But the other thing is just, it's not surprising to see players struggle in the playoffs with hitting. It's just not like it happens all the time. And, go look at Willie Mays, career playoff stats, and they're not good at all. So
I liked your comment, Ty. They are facing the best pitchers in baseball.
Yeah.
So
typically
with a lot of mileage. It didn't affect Tarek Skubal, who doubled what he pitched last year. He still looked incredibly strong, and that's a guy I'm actually interested in now because of how good he looked, the fact that he stayed healthy, the fact that he was still good deep in the season. I think I was watching some of the early games, and I'm like, this is like watered down baseball a little bit. Like the Red Sox, who won 81 games this year, which they shouldn't have. They should have finished in last in the division, finished in third somehow. They could have played against some of those teams and done pretty well and had like a 40% chance to win early on. Now, statistically, if you get a bye in this new format, we've got byes, you should have a higher chance of getting deep into the playoffs. So I don't know if this is just small sample size and like with last year, a lot of those teams got bounced out early, or how much that momentum matters. Like you saw the Mets were on the brink of elimination against the Brewers. They win in that 8th or 9th inning, and then they win in another series, kind of riding that high with that confidence. Like, how much does that actually matter? I guess what I go back to is like in this hobby, we know like we're kind of wired to de-emphasize the playoff effect for baseball with the hobby. So are we going to de-emphasize that more given this new format, or is this something where it's just like, well, it's always a crapshoot. Like the best team doesn't always win anyways, and
I think it's already happening, Phil, to be honest with you. I think to bring it more into baseball cards, you're talking about buying someone who wouldn't even have made the playoffs in Skubal because of the playoffs and seeing how he did partially. So I think it's going to be less impactful on the big players, but I think it's going to be more impactful on people like that. So I don't know.
Maybe maybe they should just change it to work like English Premier League soccer. No playoffs. You just run it the whole season. I don't know. There are some playoffs, but
Well, I mean, Ty, to your point, a lot of people have brought that up. We talked about that on Blab and having actually 2 different leagues, the small market teams can compete, because now we've got 3 of the top 4 payrolls, so that's not surprising.
yeah.
So where you can actually get demoted or promoted based on how you do. I don't know. There's just with baseball being the way it is, where there's no salary cap and no salary floor, the vast difference between the bottom teams and the top teams for what they can pay is so much more than other North American sports. So it's really, and it's just getting more and more out there. So I don't know. They're like Scott said, it's all about money. They're not going to reduce playoffs.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. With that being said, I think that's a pretty good chunk of playoff time, right? I will have a few card questions that I want to ask you all. Any final thoughts on playoff sports cards, all that good stuff? Jeff, thank you for the passion about reducing the postseason. I think in baseball purist theory, it's accurate, right?
The regular season, reducing the regular season.
No, I'm reducing the size of the postseason.
Oh, the size of the postseason.
From a baseball purist, I think it actually makes the most sense. We see back in the reason Mickey Mantle won so many World Series is because there were 5 teams that made it. So just the division winners. If it would have been
have 1 wild card.
What's that?
Have 3 in the 1 wild card, which is what it was after the realignment in the 90s.
Yeah. So I have something that will never happen that I've brought it up before on this podcast, but I wish they would do this. I think if you make it in as a divisional winner or at one of the 2 best records or something, you should go into the series with 1 game up already. Make it really hard. Make it hard on the other team to actually upset the favorite, not super easy in a 3 or a 5 game series. It shouldn't, you know what I mean? There should be
anything to increase the importance of the regular season, which is all it used to be. Before the divisions, it was the winner of the regular season played the winner of the regular season, the AL, the NL, and that was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
I have to get a point in time. That was actually a part of the negotiations for the CBA. I believe the Players Association said no to that. So.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, but it would be interesting. It is frustrating when you have a 162 game season. If your team dominates, wins over 100 games, and then just has a cold week and you're out, because some, scratchy team that won 86 games, made it in. That can be frustrating.
Rocktober, baby. Take me back to 2007.
Who are you guys rooting for? Wait, last question. Who are you rooting for now?
I just want a Dodgers-Yankees World Series. I would want anybody but the Mets to win. I have no idea why. I would love to see Cleveland win their first World Series in a long time.
That's because you sold all your Lindor cards to Phil.
I have bad taste about
What about J-Ram?
I like J-Ram. I did sell some of his cards, but I do like J-Ram. I'd be cool with the Yankees winning, and I hate to say it, owners don't want the Dodgers win because I have Mookie cards. If I didn't have any Mookie cards,
I want Ohtani to win a championship.
Yeah.
I want Ohtani and Soto to win championships, so if that means I get Dodgers, Yankees.
That's my exact.
I feel gross saying that, but that's my
it's true. There's the heart, then there's the wallet.
It's neither for me. I barely own any.
I mean, my heart's already gone. The Brewers losing, the Tigers going out, even the Padres to some extent. Yeah, so now it's give me some player at bats. I want to see more baseball.
Yeah. How about you, Phil?
Heart says Guardians, and the wallet says any other team. I guess. Yeah, Yankees or Dodgers, one of them.
Okay. Well, with that being said, I have before we move forward, how long have we been going?
We could wrap.
44 minutes is when we started. So about, was that 24?
It's already getting pretty.
Just go through a couple questions quick.
I just need to go to bed soon. It's already
said we would. Just go through 2 questions.
All right, let's do one then. Yeah, or a couple.
Okay.
We can make them quick.
All right. So I have a few questions for you both. And this first, well, not a question, they're statements. You know what cardboard consensus is? The rules are still being established. You don't even really know what it is. But what it is as of right now is I will say a statement, and on a scale of 1 to 5, we'll raise our hand at the same time to get an idea if we agree or disagree with that statement. So 1 is I don't agree. 5 is I 100% agree. So this is actually from a baseball card hot take. I do this on my YouTube channel, Scotty B Cards, as well as on my Instagram. I ask for hot takes. People submit them to me. This is a baseball card hot take from one of my Instagram followers. Jackson Merill will be viewed as the next Kyle Tucker. No hobby value, but a great player. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Wow.
I had more time to think about this
Look
one.
at this spread. I like
Yeah.
this spread.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm anxious to hear Scott's. Why don't you start?
Let's
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
The biggest difference is Jackson Holiday is a better defender. Jackson Merill. Yeah, Jackson Merrill is a better defender. And he had 4.4 this year at age 20. Kyle Tucker's first full year was like 24. So I think
Age is
that
a big thing for you.
age is a huge thing here. If he's able to have 4 or 5 WAR seasons by the age he's 25, right? He's already, or by age he's 24, he's already at 20 WAR when Kyle Tucker's career WAR is like 20 WAR. I think Jackson Merrill is poised to be the hobby, like a big hobby darling.
Really? He's
I
21,
think he's
though, I
poised.
think, Scott. I think
Is he 21 now, not 20? Am I thinking of Churio? Churio's 20. But that early debut helps. I think he had a lot of promise this year. The hardest part of his hobby is going to be staying in San Diego, to be completely transparent in regards to value. But Kyle Tucker didn't have that effect because he was in Houston, which actually is not maybe it was bad coming off of the cheating scandal. But Merrill's biggest thing is going to be staying in San Diego. But I think he has a lot going for him, and he's young, which I like. And the hobby already likes him more than they ever liked Kyle Tucker, which helps. Having that hype at the gate helps.
Tucker had a slower start too.
To his career?
Yeah, that's what it all comes down to is like the trajectory, cumulative WAR, and the age of Tucker. Like, what are the chances Tucker gets into the Hall of Fame? What do you guys think? Is it 20%? Is it 10%?
10%.
Is it 5?
10 to 20%.
14%.
Keep going.
That's a big problem. It took a while for them to make him an everyday player, to have faith in him, even though he was pretty top prospect.
He's put up some monster season since he's been
healthy.
Took him a while to
this year was another one till he got hurt.
Yeah, defense is and the base running is getting better. I think, at least from a stolen base perspective, it took him a while to get that walk rate up. I think his walk rate maybe has increased like each of the last 4 seasons, which is something to watch. So still a really great player, but yeah, Merill, from a card perspective, he gives us more hope right now.
Yeah, I get that.
That's where I'm at. And
I'm going to jump down.
A one is pretty strong, Scott.
I'm going to 3.
I think they'll be viewed different. It's all in Merrill's hands, right? Like if he plays bad, then yes, he's the next Kyle Tucker values. But if we assume
he plays bad, good, I don't know. He'll be lucky to have put 4 or 5 years together like Tucker did. So
I'm just saying, like, assuming he plays good, I don't think he'll have the same pitfalls as Kyle Tucker does in his hobby. I don't think that.
Well, one thing he needs to do is fix his facial hair.
Yeah, he does.
Needs a more iconic look. A more iconic look would help his card prices immediately. Get a good
look
stash.
like mini Chris Bryant.
Yeah, same head shape.
He's Chris Bryant with like gross dirt stash facial hair.
Yeah. Way better looking than Kyle Tucker. So that's another vote against Kyle Tucker.
Chris is not here to comment on their glutes. We'll ask him next week.
Yeah, Chris isn't here for that. What about you, Jeff? You said 5?
I said 5. Just because I thought Kyle Tucker, I guess I didn't realize he was a 3-year later starter. I knew he started later than Merill, but I didn't realize it was 3 full years. So that does make sense. But Kyle Tucker has put some really good seasons together. And yes, he's not as great a defender, so his WAR isn't going to be as high. But like from a fantasy baseball perspective, he was really, really good and never got the respect in the hobby. And I kind of thought he would. And maybe this was his year to do it before he got hurt. But yeah, I feel like being good doesn't necessarily mean being hobby good. And I think it's more likely that he becomes not the guy hobby than he does.
That is I will say, my assumption was that he plays well. Because if we can say, it's easier to take the under and say he's going to do bad, because you can say about any player long-term in the hobby. It's easier to say, oh, I'm going to take the 99% that won't be Hall of Famers, right? I don't know. My assumption is that if he plays well, like Kyle Tucker's playing well, I don't think he'll have the same pitfalls as Kyle Tucker.
Well, yes, since he started 3 years earlier, if he puts seasons together better than Kyle Tucker by the time he's 30, he's going to have 9 of them instead of 4 or 5. So yes, that's the case. But
the question says no hobby value, but a great player. So I'm assuming great player.
Kyle Tucker, by the way. Baseball's wild when it comes to voting and things like this. His 2021 season, he had 30 home runs, 294 average, 147 OPS plus, and a 5.7 WAR, MVP 20. In 2023, he was slightly lower in everything. He had 29 homers, 284 average, 142 OPS plus, 5 points lower, and a 5.4 WAR, slightly lower, MVP 5. It's like
That's a huge
really,
jump.
and so he's only got one MVP top 10 finish. He had an MVP 15 and MVP 20, and that's it. And this year, I don't know. I don't know where he'll finish because
He's got the
I
Rafael
don't even know if
Devers
he's eligible
problem.
He was injured.
It's just hard for some of those guys with the way they contribute to win the MVP or even finish top 5.
Yep. Once you're outside of the top 5, like I don't know,
being overshadowed on your own team, it's pretty crazy that he even got a top 5 finish.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing about Jackson Merill real quick? He had 12 outs above average this year, playing the first time in the outfield in his entire career. Kyle
So
Tucker,
is he going to be like Tatis with a huge first year and then regress a little bit, or is he going to continue that trajectory? If he does, that's incredible.
I mean, you have to bet that he's going to regress. You have offensively he could progress, but I don't know. It's tough to say. But I will say Kyle Tucker from 2019 to 2024 has 5 outs above average. Jackson Merill has 12 this year. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, okay. but we've talked about defense not doing a lot to move the hobby needle. You really have to be.
It moves the WAR needle, though. That's the only reason I'm saying it. Because if you can be a plus defender and be a 130 OPS plus guy, that's how you get to 6 WAR consistently. That's like what Lindor did.
Yeah, but Merill had a pretty great year. And what'd you say? He didn't even get to 5, right? Even with
he
that,
had a 127 OPS plus.
So even with that defense, though, it didn't get him to 5, did it? Or did it?
I don't know about fan graphs. I didn't look at fan graphs. I just looked at Baseball Reference. He was at 4.4.
All right.
Any final thoughts on Jackson Merill? 5.3 fan graph WAR. So
if he stays at center field, that's a big boost over Kyle Tucker.
Yeah. Yeah, he'll be. Yeah. So that was my thoughts on him. That was a good question from that person. Here's another question from this my baseball card hot takes. There has never been, it's a statement. I keep saying question. Everybody listening, it's a statement. There has never been a worse time to open packs/wax in the hobby's history than now. We need to caveat this.
A lot of factors in there. You got to just have to, you're just going to have to ask, and we'll have to individually choose.
You want to caveat this?
I want to say, I think he's talking about from a break-even perspective, not from a fun perspective. I just want to say that. So you can look at it both ways, but 1, 2, 3, go. Weren't you saying, Ty, how bad it is on ROI like last video or this video?
Yeah, but the absolute worst time ever to open cards was the late 1980s and early 90s.
But no, they were so cheap. They were so cheap.
It doesn't matter. I don't care.
You still made your money back then. You could sell your cards in the moment. You made more money in that era than you did
trash
now.
And I didn't even care about the money.
There was no variety. It was all the same cards.
Our stuff is trash now.
You don't know what the 10-year ROI is because we're not in 2034 yet with this stuff.
Okay, keep going. I like it, Ty.
I'm being contrarian with a 1 because of that, because I think the late 80s and early 90s was like the tail end worst possible outcome of an era with absolutely no variety whatsoever. And now we have a crap ton of variety with a lot of overpriced product and not a lot of transparency even into what you can get, and half the time products being pre-sold or even released without checklists available. And there's a lot of things working against it. And I mentioned that I just did a video on ripping $1,000 worth of hobby product, and it wasn't my money, thankfully. I would have lost $823 ripping 1,000. Basically, it was the most expensive card I got was $30, and like the next most expensive was $10 on $1,000 worth of boxes. So the value proposition is tough in a small sample size. If you're a whale with a big pocket and you open a ton and you rip cases at a time of a product, you can actually hit some pretty big stuff. But I do still have a lot more fun now ripping a lot of certain products than I do, stuff even from when I was a kid necessarily. Like even in the 90s, sometimes like that stuff was pretty heavily printed. There just weren't as many products as there are now. And the price is different, but I don't know. It's not a good value proposition at all.
Yeah. I'll go because I was the closest to tie. And
what number were you?
I said 4, but I see every point he's saying. This is kind of like an MVP vote where you just have to put your own parameters on what you think is the most valuable player. And for me, I was taking the question as opening then. So yes, the value proposition now is terrible. I just kept picturing 89 and 90 Donruss. But at the time for the cost, I loved opening it and putting sets together. And yes, you'd only get the same cards, but we didn't know there was going to be a gold lava 1 of 1 sometime down the road. It was just that. So for that reason, that's why I'm trying to compartmentalize that period of opening and the benefits I got then versus now and the price points and the return you get now. So yeah, I think it's up to our own discretion. We all agree that it was overproduced back then. It's not worth anything now. And now there's too many products that are overpriced. So it's just a matter of perspective. But for my money at the time, I would like to open those junk wax products.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 5 might have been a little unfair because I think a lot of my viewpoints on opening wax, because the products have changed so much over the few decades, where I compare it a lot to 2018. And I know, seeing my customers open my product, how difficult it is to get the right card of the right player. It just doesn't happen anymore because the checklists are all larger, the prints are higher. There's all this fake scarcity where, oh, that's an important card. Wait, no, it's not, because you didn't have this gold refractor. You have this one. So I'd say it's the worst time to open product if you care about your family, because the downside is pretty huge. It's gambling. It's an unregulated casino. This is, and Fanatics, give them some credit. They've spent a lot of effort and money on trying to create cool cards that have meaning, memorable cards. We've seen it across the last 2 years, across all these different products. MLB debut patch with some of the game used materials they're putting in stuff. You've got the Topps Dynasty Black, even this Mercury thing they're doing with unlicensed Wemby cards is kind of cool. Yeah, there's stuff. They're making an effort. They surely are. Topps was never creative. They never were. And Fanatics could use a competitor, I think, of course. The issue becomes cost benefit. It's the value prop. It's breakers that are making costs or the entry point more accessible, but not really cheaper in aggregate. If you add up all the folks that spend all this money on breaking, like, are you really saving money this way? And you have Fanatics playing games of distribution. They're the only boy in town. So if you got to buy it from them, it's harder to buy it business to business. There's all these things that they're doing. They're turning the spigots off to make it seem like something's in demand when it's not. So they're definitely playing games that affect prices to be higher. And then all of the marketing gimmicks, of course, on top. We made an episode recently about like the lotterization, or that wasn't the word we used. That might have been Neo's word, but we were talking about like how we're basically just selling lottery tickets now with some of these products, with the Ohtani 50-50 product. Like, do people actually care about putting together the set? Some people do. And it's expensive if you really want to. Are people really going for those non-numbered parallels and for some of those like really tough to pull parallels? Or are they going just for the chase? Would they be better off just buying a scratch ticket, a Powerball ticket? They might have better odds that way too. So from a ROI perspective, but also looking at like the downside risks that this could cause to your financial future, now it's probably the worst time.
So I answered this question myself on Tuesday when it's released. And that's exactly what I said. If you want to look at it from a financial perspective, now is the worst time ever to do it. If you want to look at it from like a fun perspective, now is probably the best time to ever open cards, because there's so much you can get out of packs. Like Ty said, this is a sheet of 91 Fleer. You know, you can get a 91 Fleer that's worth more than $1. Nothing. Like, you could open that entire box and it's fun for some people, but like you get nothing. So like, that's the hard part. You can get legend autographs.
It was fun at the time, Scott.
I agree.
You didn't exist yet, but it was fun at the time.
I was -4 at that moment. But yeah, so that's a good one. We have time for one more quick one. We're already over time, but we'll be quick. Personal collecting or PCing more than 3 players is a bad idea. Okay. Hands up. 3, 2, 1, go. All All right, Ty. Actually, let's have Phil go first. I want Phil to go first in this one.
So there's some people that buy all sports, and I always wonder, like, how do they keep up with it? Like, I know Chris is almost exclusively baseball, and Scott is too. The rest of us dabble. Teapot dabbles the most, probably. So if you can do that, you have to be able to set guidelines for what you're into and what you're not. Like, even within baseball, guys, like, I've found myself just in the modern segment, like, there's prospect, there's rookie cards. Ooh, I really like these heritage red inks. I like the heritage golds, but I like the classic Topps Chrome golds. Oh, I like the Bowman Chrome autographs. And now I'm starting to really like the, the low numbered non-autograph parallels, like the first oranges. Oh, they've got rookie card autos too. So I think the key is just setting rules for yourself, and that could come in time. But I think there's certainly the ability to PC 4 guys. And that can help limit the risk if you're dealing with like modern quarterbacks. Not that you should just pick guys from the ultra modern era when you do that. And I think most of us know better. So,
okay, Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I took it to mean that you PC 3 players, but for me, for my PC, I've moved more into and the PC that Chris and I own more into significant cards of significant players. So yes, I guess maybe if you're just only collecting cards of those players, maybe that's 3 is too much. But for me, it's like if I'm getting an Ohtani card or a Freddie Freeman card, I'm not going to look at 99% of their cards. I'm just looking at the kinds that I really want to get, either the super short prints or a rookie parallel autograph or Bowman first. So in that way, I have a lot more than 3 players: Mookie, Manny, Freeman, Soto, Ohtani, but I'm not trying to get all cards of them. So I guess maybe my approach is just more of a hybrid approach, but I don't, at least for me, limiting it to 3 players would be counterproductive because I wouldn't feel good about my collection.
The number could be subjective. You could say 5. My point is, like, should you have a limit, right? And Ty, I want to hear your thoughts before I share mine, but what do you think about this?
It's simple. Collect what you like. That's what I always say. I don't think there's any boundaries when it comes to collecting and PCing that you should be limited. Some people are really focused and really even obsessive would be the right word, and they want to chase everything and they just focus on single player. I'm 5 years in now to having returned to the hobby. And in many ways, like, my advice to people is to try to stay focused early on and not get the Pokemon syndrome, I call it, of like trying to catch everything and get everything. But on the flip side of that, there is something about that process. If you come in, like I think Jeff, you did, and you're buying into breaks and you're just kind of immersing yourself. Some of us have that personality to like sort of jump in head first and then figure out the lessons and pay the cost of tuition, so to speak, when you do that. I'm at a point now, 5 years in, where I've, to Phil's point, really well said, starting to put rules around my PC. And I'm moving some Drummond cards. I just sold a Drummond Nebula, which I never thought I would do, but it was a 2020 in a Cavs jersey. And I'm sort of collapsing it down to say, I only want Pistons Drummond stuff. I don't want the rest of the jerseys. I only want certain cards from that. I don't need all the numbered, patch autos that I have and things. I'm starting to consolidate that. And then for the rest of the collection, I mean, if you look in my room around me, I've taken some of it down because I'm actually going through this curation process. And it really is that as much a curation as consolidation. I like gold cards. I like color match cards. I've also geeked out so much that I've started putting together spreadsheets where I almost put players into like tiers, like those little tier makers of S tier, A tier, like that. And saying if a player in a league or a team or whatever is only in C tier, I'm only going to allow myself to have a maximum of 2 cards of that player, and like working the list. And it just sort of forces me to do it. And then if I can't like fill it up on the walls in 1 touches or whatever, like whatever those rules are for you, going through that process to help set some boundaries and guardrails can be really cathartic, can be really useful. And, when you put a whole box of stuff together too, and you add it all up and you're like, whoa, this is like $2,000, that's kind of an interesting feeling too, when you can use it to put a fence in your backyard or whatever. So it's a process. The whole process of collecting is a journey. And I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it, but there's also no shame in revising your strategy over the years and changing it radically. And maybe that means some people just wind up with only 1 or 2 or 3 players that they collect, and that's it. And if that's the case, fine. And some of those are some of the best collections on earth, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having like a very distributed collection of a whole bunch of unique stuff either.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap.
Scott, you didn't give us your thoughts.
He didn't
I want to keep it a mystery.
He said it all in his own head.
I guess my thoughts on it are, I have found in my own collecting that if I spread myself too thin, I end up having okay cards of a lot of players versus having the coolest cards of players I really care about.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like for a true, like, and actually, to be honest, I've kind of, it's been like a full circle. I can talk about that, but I had a really great Mookie collection of some really great Mookie cards. I actually sold some of those and bought more established Mookie cards that maybe from like a collector's perspective aren't as cool, but they're more valuable to like the hobby eye. And the reason I did that is because I had so much of one player that all I had was one player, that when he struggled last postseason, it was like really brutal. And so I was like, I need to get another player or two, so that way I don't have all my emotions on this. Got Larry Walker going. So now I have like Larry Walker's one of my guys. Billy Butler doesn't count because he's so cheap, but like maybe he does, but like that's another one. But like now I'm debating on going after more Juan Soto, right? So I think it helps just having a few guys you care about, so that way you can watch their at bats and enjoy baseball that way when your team is the Rockies and they're bad. So, but I think having a few good teams is better than, a few players you really care about versus too much spread makes it more fun for me.
I'm going to give a shout out to Brian from Cajun Cardboard on this video. I'm against consolidating sports card collections. Here's why. I think he's really reasonable at this, and he's actually made many videos, and he actually did do some consolidation, but he kind of breaks down in this video that he likes all the cardboard, and he'd rather have all these cards than consolidate and sacrifice everything for one card. And that's fine. You can go the other direction too. Plenty of people do. Plenty of people would rather have the big card and go that direction. And that's really cool too. If that's how you want to collect, and you just have like some really amazing, and frankly, the big ones are typically the ones that are going to hold more value long-term. And they're typically going to be less effort to get out of if you happen to need to do that. You can always send it to an auction house and get that money. So anyway.
I agree with that, Ty. And one thing I'll say about bigger cards as well is that you can never find those bigger cards again, but usually the cards you sold to fund that card, you can always find, at least pretty often. Chris disagreed with me last week on that because he said he hasn't seen a red Freddie Freeman Topps Chrome autograph. But like, I know where at least 3 of them are. So like realistically, he could try to track those down if he wanted to. But it's definitely something you have to figure out for yourself, how you like to collect. There's not one correct answer. There really isn't.
I've got a fun stat for you guys to close with. One of my favorite budding players on the Tigers, I was gonna make this a vote, is Parker Meadows, the future face of Major League Baseball. The Tigers were so he missed a lot of time with injury this year. They were 54-28 with Parker Meadows in the lineup this year, which is a .655 winning percentage, higher than the Dodgers, higher than any team in baseball when he played. And he's a really interesting player. He doesn't really do anything great like on the stat sheet, but I watched a lot of his games, and he's a really fun player. He had a 2.2 WAR in like 80 games. So defensively, he's unbelievable in center field. Those are the kinds of players I like to collect for my PC. Those are fun guys to collect.
Should check out Jackson Merill.
Yeah. Or Kyle Tucker.
Or Kyle Tucker. Heading into his age 28 season. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments down below what your thoughts are, and we will see you in the next video.